Cowboys, we all know they have been less than proactive regarding locking up Dak Prescott in the final year of his deal. Mikey T, what kind of bind are they in at this point? What should the Cowboys be doing?
Hannah, they're in a massive bind. They gave Dak Prescott a blank check. Let's just cut through it all. At the end of the season, they cannot franchise Dak Prescott. They did not draft his replacement. They have a really good team, and Dak was second in the league in MVP voting. So basically what you're saying to Dak is, what is it going to take to sign you? And I think he's going to blow away all records from an average per year and guaranteed basis.
Yeah, to Mike's point, the original sin here was letting Dak play out his contract, not getting a deal done the first time around, and now they're in a position where there really are two not great options. One is to, as he said, give Dak an enormous contract because of all his leverage. The other is to move on after this year, in which case you'll be in quarterback purgatory. My preference would probably be the overpay, just because I don't think they have any good options, partly of their own volition, but there are no easy choices for Dallas because of the decisions they made years ago.
Let's talk about those Cowboys. Their defense led the NFL in takeaways during Dan Quinn's 3 seasons as their defensive coordinator. They did so by pressuring the quarterback. Under Quinn, Dallas pressured opposing QBs on 36% of their dropbacks. That was the highest rate in the NFL. But with Quinn leaving Dallas now, head coach for the Commanders, Mike Zimmer takes over as the Cowboys DC. And Zim talked about coming into this well-established unit, and he said, and I quote, "Usually when I come in, the defense is not good, you know? They're pretty darn good. So it's a little different for me because we have to advance some of the things we were doing good and try to improve on the things they weren't doing so good. But for the most part, they played pretty darn good. And we're going to try to accentuate that, maybe a little more technique-oriented, maybe a little more disciplined, some of those things," close quote. All right, D. Woody. We know Zim, right? He is going to demand preparation. He is going to demand discipline. This is a defense that was top 3 in penalties last season. How different do you anticipate this defense is going to look?
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be some different variables with this defense, particularly I think in how they attack blitz-wise. I think the one thing about Mike Zimmer, he likes to run a lot of simulated blitzes. And when you talk about Dan Quinn's defense, that's usually a one gap, get up the field. They like to rush the quarterback and stop the run on the way to the quarterback. So I think when you talk about Mike Zimmer, you're going to see a guy that is going to demand a little bit more out of his guys. Guys going to have to think a little bit more about the things, the play calling that he's going to throw out there. And, you know, I think that's going to be an adjustment for this Dallas Cowboys defense because under Quinn, they didn't want to do a lot. They didn't want to have a lot of complicated schemes because they wanted guys to not think as much and just get up the field. So there's going to be some differences in this new scheme that they're going to run in Dallas.
I thought that quote was really interesting from him. He talked about the things they did well and accentuating things they didn't do well. As Damien said, Mike's known for his simulated pressures, the infamous double-A gap blitz in Minnesota. Yeah, I think we'll see some of that, and I expect that the Cowboys will continue to rush the passer at a high level. That's not what they didn't do well, though. What he is probably alluding to or talking around was the fact that they really struggled to defend the run, particularly in the later part of the season. Now, it should be noted, a lot of those struggles were due to personnel. In fact, when we look at the groupings that they use, Dallas used their base defense, meaning when they just had 4 DBs on the field, less than 4% of the time. They were living in dime with 3 safeties, in large part because they did not have they literally ran out of linebackers on this team to injury. So now you bring in Eric Kendricks, who's a veteran, Overshown, who was a rookie last year and lost the season due to injury. He was a 3rd-round draft pick, will play. I think we're going to see a little bit more base defense, and I think it's going to be incumbent upon Zimmer to get them to play the run better from a technique perspective as well.
You know, not all first-year coordinators are created equal. Through the lens of Mike McCarthy, I'm telling Mike Zimmer, we have about 5 minutes to transition here. I don't want to hear, like, for the first month of September, we're getting the kinks worked out or we're trying some new calls. Mike McCarthy is under enormous pressure. We all know that. He's in the last year of his contract. So from a head coach perspective, we're going to do what we do well. maybe tweak a couple of things, as you guys mentioned, like simulated pressures. But by and large, we have to be great from day one. And I agree with Mina that Eric Kendricks is a consequential acquisition because they were really undersized at linebacker towards the end of last year. Maybe Stephon Gilmore is signed as a depth at corner, but this has to be a defense that hits the ground running.
By the way, Micah Parsons has not been there. Not last week, not this week for OTAs. Did show up for media day, but no practices. It's probably worth noting. The Cowboys will look to become the first team to repeat as NFC East champion since the Eagles won 4 straight division titles from 01 to 04. Entering this year, the NFC East has gone 19 consecutive seasons without a repeat champ, the longest streak by any division in NFL history. ESPN Analytics has the Eagles as a slight favorite over the Cowboys to win the NFC East in what is expected to be a 2-team race for the division title. Mina, do you like Philly over Dallas in the East?
I've gone back and forth on this. I'm kind of edging Dallas a little bit as I think a little bit more about Philly with their 2 new coordinators, some of the changes on defense and the struggles I saw down the stretch. I know everybody's really low on Dallas's offseason, but I don't think they lost as much talent as maybe people describe.
I'm going with Philly because of the acquisition of Saquon Barkley. Jalen Hurts has led the NFL in the last 3 years for rushes by a quarterback. I think Saquon makes Jalen Hurts healthier, and I give the edge to Philly.
Yeah, I'm going to get a slight edge to Philadelphia, and I do agree with Mike T. I think the Saquon Barkley acquisition is going to help be a 3-down back, and it's going to help Jalen Hurts, as well.
Retired NFL great Steve Smith today. Well, he had the 8th most receiving yards in NFL history. Another great player in NFL history. He was a Giants OTAs, working with their young receivers, working out Jalen Hyatt, Malik Neighbors today. He goes way back with Giants GM Joe Shane, back to their days with the Panthers. So he's going to be there a couple of days with the G-Men. Mina, he was there last year, too, working with the receivers. With all the questions they have surrounding Daniel Jones this year, what's your assessment of the wide receiver group in New York?
It's tricky because I like the receivers. Neighbors, obviously, incredibly explosive. I thought it was the right draft pick for them. I think Jalen Hyatt, I liked him in college as well a lot. Wan'Dale Robinson, there's a lot of potential there. But I feel like they have sort of duplicative skill sets, which is to say, I think most of them should probably play in the slot. Jalen Hyatt played a lot outside last year, and I thought watching him, I think it would be easier for him if he wasn't lined up wide. Neighbors, to get the best out of him, I think you want him in the slot a lot so he can get free releases. So for Brian Dable and Mike Kafka, the challenge is, okay, we have a lot of these receivers who would probably be best aligned in the same position. How do we optimize it? How do we find ways to spring them open at the line of scrimmage, knowing that we might not have that, very obvious guy line him up outside, as the X receiver to win.
And you mentioned Mike Kafka. Obviously, he's the OC. He's been calling the plays the last couple years. But this year, Brian Daboll is going to go back to his OC days. He will be calling the plays. Here's what he had to say about it.
I've called plays for a long time, so it's good to get out here, practice, and do it. But there's a whole process that goes through with it. There's a training camp, there's OTAs, and make the decision, like I said back in March, that I feel is best.
But what about the continuity involved there? You've had Kafka do it for a couple of years. Is there concern with changing up the continuity, or you guys are pretty much on the same page when it comes to that?
Yeah, just working through practice here, and again, we'll go through the whole process. Go through training camp, go through the different situations. There's a lot that goes into it, so we'll just take it practice by practice.
Well, ESPN Analytics gives Daboll and the Giants just a 13% chance to make the playoffs, 3rd lowest in the NFC, ahead of only the Panthers and the Commanders. They're projecting another tough season for the G-Men, who are the 5th highest chance to end up with the #1 overall pick in next year's draft. Wow. So, listen, what has he had? 8 seasons as an OC, Daboll has, before he became a head coach. Obviously, he called plays for one of the most productive offenses in the NFL with the Bills. How much pressure is he under, D. Woody?
He's under a lot of pressure here, Hannah. And listen, obviously they gave that contract to Daniel Jones, and Daniel Jones is certainly a huge unknown because of, he hasn't been available. He hasn't been available, and most people think he's not a franchise quarterback. And listen, when you have the pressure that Brian Daboll has on him, guess what? You're going to call the plays, because if you're going to go down swinging, hell, I'm going to go down swinging on my terms and not with somebody else calling the plays. So I don't blame Brian Daboll one bit for, bringing in the reins of calling the plays, because if the ship is going to sink, it's going to be on my terms.
Man, let's hope that line is improved. They allowed 85 sacks last season. Oh, I know that's painful for you to hear, T. Woody.